So thanks everyone for joining. We appreciate it. Our second ACRC review. So here we go. So good afternoon and welcome to the April 1st Alternative Compliance Review Committee meeting. My name is Mary Kelly and I am the chair of the ACRC. Today's meeting is being held as a virtual meeting in accordance with the electronic meeting statute. The requirements of notice, access, and minutes are being met through the electronic means. The public and the media are able to view this meeting on the city's Planning, Design, and Development YouTube channel. Next, I'd like to introduce the ACRC members. Committee members, feel free to wave to the audience if you are sharing your camera. Dave Walters is our vice chair.
Hello.
Paige Case. Eric Zavril. Toby
Hello.
Holmes. Michael Paul, James, Renee Rubens, and then finally Michael Bridges. And then we also have Kirsty, who is our planning department architect, and then Mackenzie Day, who is kind enough to host this meeting for us. Did I miss anyone? All right, if not, then we're going to continue. We'd like to start each meeting with a brief overview of the role of the ACRC, as well as the meeting structure for members of the public who are in attendance. The ACRC was established to provide recommendations on requests for alternative compliance for projects in the Transit-Oriented Development, or TOD, zone district. Alternative compliance allows the implementation of alternative and innovative design practices that meet the intent of the TOD districts and do not have a significant adverse impact on surrounding development. Alternative compliance is only allowed for select standards. Each standard shall be reviewed against its specific review criteria to determine that the alternative compliance meets each standard. No standard may be waived in its entirety. Our scheduled meeting time runs from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Committee members may request a brief recess between item reviews. Each agenda item will include the following: a brief presentation of the request and recommendation from the city staff, no more than 5 minutes. A brief presentation of the request and any supporting information from the applicant, no more than 5 minutes. A public comment period for those in attendance to provide input on the item. This period will be limited to 5 minutes of discussion in support of the request and 5 minutes for discussion in opposition of the request. After the public comment period has been closed, the ACRC may question the applicant and ACRC staff members on the request. After the committee members have asked their questions, I will close the hearing for discussion and deliberation. The ACRC will then craft a recommendation for approval with modifications or denial. Once a recommendation has been moved, I will do a roll call vote to capture each committee member's recommendation for our minutes. Could we put everyone on mute, Mackenzie? Or if you could mute yourselves, that would be great. I'm getting some feedback. A final vote on the recommendation by the ACRC will close the hearing. Written comments on this request will be accepted after the meeting until 11:59 p.m. on April 2nd. These comments should be sent to our staff liaison, Kirsty Sanchez at charlottenc.gov. Comments should be limited to 375 words and will be provided to the Planning and Design Development Director before a decision is made on the request. Staff will forward any written comments along with the ACRC and staff recommendations to the Planning, Design, and Development Director within 5 business days of the meeting. The PD&D Director will make the final decision on the request using the recommendations provided by staff and the ACRC. If alternative compliance is denied by the PD&D Director, nothing precludes the applicant from pursuing alternative options through filing an appeal with the Zoning Board of Adjustments. rezoning to Todd EX, or from submitting a new request for alternative compliance. Before we get started, does anyone from the committee need to recuse themselves from any of the items on today's agenda? All right, let's move on. We have two requests for alternative compliance on the agenda today. The first request is ACRC 2021-00001. This is a request for alternative compliance from section 15.2.1.EC, the prominent entrance spacing. I'll invite staff to present the application and staff recommendations on this request. You have up to 5 minutes to do so.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Mackenzie, could you go to the next slide? Great. So as Mary said, today we have two requests for alternative compliance, and both of these requests are for the property located at 3100 North Tryon Street. So I'll start off by giving a brief overview of the site, and then I'll dive into the first request that we have. So again, the subject property is located at 3100 North Tryon Street and is zoned Transit Community Center. And the applicant is proposing a mixed-use development, which includes the construction of a wrapped parking deck, apartments, and a grocery store. So here we have a zoning map, and I have the property outlined or highlighted in orange here. And you can see that the surrounding zone districts are light industrial, heavy industrial, business, single-family residential, and transit urban center. Can you go to the next slide? So here I just have some screenshots of the properties across the street from the site. The first image is of the property across North Tryon Street, so that is currently used for auto sales. And then the second image are the properties that are across the street from 36th Street, and so this is just some vacant land in both the business and single-family residential zone district. So if you could go to the next slide. So that brings us to our first request. So this is a request for alternative compliance from section 15.2.1.E.C, which is for prominent entrance spacing. And this request is for the facade along 36th Street. So 36th Street is classified as an other primary frontage and requires a prominent entrance every 75 feet. And a prominent entrance is defined as a building entrance that's visually distinctive from the remaining portions of the facade where it's located. So per the TOD standards, 2 prominent entrances would be required along 36th Street. So if you could go to the next slide. So as an alternative to providing 2 prominent entrances, the applicant is proposing 1 prominent entrance, providing a public plaza on the south side of the grocery store with outdoor seating, landscaped elements, and bike parking, and then providing an activated pedestrian space along the facade, which includes seating options, raised planters, and architectural details. So if we could go to the next slide. So here we have the site plan. Again, for this first request, we're looking at the building facade along 36th Street. So I've highlighted items in yellow that go along with this request. So again, the TOD standards would typically require 2 prominent entrances here. The applicant is providing 1 prominent entrance, which you can see it has a red line along 36th Street there. They are proposing activated pedestrian space with raised planters, seating options, and architectural details, and then an urban plaza with outdoor seating. And I think it's important to note that this outdoor plaza is providing open space that's in addition to the open space that is typically required for this site. And if we go to the next slide. So here we have our building elevations, and this is a view from the corner of North Tryon and East 36th Street. And then if we could go to the next one. So here we have that same elevation, but with some call outs, identifying the different architectural treatments that the applicant is proposing. So they're proposing a canopy with sedum trays and providing that green roof element there, some raised planters, a brick soldier course, a metal canopy, and hand-laid brick with custom finish. So if we could go to the next slide. So here we have the criteria that we use when we evaluate requests for alternative compliance when it comes to dimensional standards. So we're looking at the application and we're asking, does the site maintain compatibility with the adjacent developments and surrounding land uses? Does the site maintain pedestrian safety and walkability? And does the design maintain an engaging pedestrian environment on the ground floor? So after reviewing the application and using these 3 criteria that are outlined in section 15.11, staff feels that the proposal meets the criteria and the intent of the TOD districts, and we recommend approval of the request. So that's all I have on this one. I'll turn it back to you, Mary.
Sorry, I put myself on mute. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Kirsty. Next, I'll invite the applicant to present any additional information on the request. You have up to 5 minutes to do so.
Tarleton, this is Richard Petersheim with Land Design. Tarleton, it may be a good point to talk about, as we discussed today, bringing in the importance of the grocer to the neighborhood and why we've selected this particular site. He may be on mute. We can't hear you, Tarleton, for some reason.
Charlton, you're not muted on our end. If you're using a phone, you may have your phone on mute. If you could double check that.
Hear me now?
Yes. Very good.
All right, there we go. Sorry about that. So I'm Tarleton Long. I'm a principal with Avery Hall, the owner and developer. I lead the local Charlotte office, live here in Charlotte. The main purpose of this variance is the goal to bring a grocery store to the site. And as many of you may know, NODA is unique in that it does not have a full-service modern grocer in the neighborhood. And neither does many of the adjacent neighborhoods, such as Trine Hills or Sugar Creek or even Villa Heights. And this site is really the most viable grocery site in the neighborhood because it's the main vehicular thoroughfare, both north-south along Trine, but also east-west on 36th. It also is right by the light rail stop at 36th Street, and the future Cross Charlotte Trail goes right by the site as well. So not only does the neighborhood critically need a grocery store, and there's vast community support to bring one, but we really have the best situated site to do so. That being said, grocery tenants operate under very much their suburban style models. They have prototypes and layouts that they use typically in suburban settings where entries must be oriented towards parking rather than the street. And then they have their typical interior store layouts where kind of the front of the grocery store would be oriented towards the parking, and then the back is typically lined with produce and dairy products and whatnot. So it's a challenge to take their suburban models and apply it to a dense urban setting. And so it's key for us to provide a layout that's viable for these national grocery chains to omit this single entry, to allow for their prototype layouts to work here, and thus their willingness to come to this location. So again, it goes back towards the need in the neighborhood. The neighborhood really needs a grocery store. This site is perfect for a grocery store, and we just need to make these tweaks to the zoning so that they are willing to come to this location.
If I may add something, this is Richard again, that Kirsty, or if you can pull up the site plan prior to this recap. Yeah, there you go. That there are actually, if you see each of the green arrows, those are points of ingress into this building at ground level, which, again, there are 2 main entrances off of the plaza and off of, the parking area, which will be primary, but 2 additional points of ingress into the building, which typically is a very tough, very extremely tough sell to a grocer. Those end up being either egress just for the building or back of house egress. These will be primary entrances into the building. They will not enter the grocery store. They will enter foyers to the building to get up to the upper levels. But that was a pretty significant concession for them to think through how that's going to impact their layout. Typically, that would not be happening like that.
And then additionally, I'd like to point out that if we can flip to the rendering, while the grocery stores might view these frontages as their back of house, as owner, and as well as a development company that focuses on design, we actually do the exterior design in-house. We care deeply about the buildings we build and the design of them. That we very much view this as our front door. This is our presentation to the neighborhood and to the community. So we want to activate these in ways that are best for the community and the neighborhood, and design them thoughtfully, even though the actual tenants might just view them as where they line their dairy products up against. So I want to emphasize that we want to focus on quality here. We really want to execute something that both us as owner and the neighborhood can be proud of. And we're also planning to hold this building long term. So we have, long-term vested interest in making this a great experience.
All right, thank you, Tarleton. Thank you, Richard. That's the end of your time. So at this time, I'd like to open the floor for our public comment period. As previously mentioned, we allow up to 5 minutes for discussion and support, and 5 minutes for those opposed to the agenda item. As we invite members of the public to speak, I'd like to ask that the discussion is kept relevant to the design standards related to this request and alternative proposed by the applicant. We'll begin with the 5-minute period for the discussion in support of the item. Do we have any speakers in support of the item?
This is Kirsty. So we didn't have anybody sign up to speak during the public portion, and we did not receive any written comments on either of the requests. So I think that we can close out the public comment period and hand it over to the ACRC so that they can start asking questions to me or to the applicant.
All right, great. Thank you, Kirsty. So now's the time for the ACRC to ask the staff or the applicant any follow-up questions on the request. Again, I'd like to ask that the discussion be kept relevant to the design standards related to this request and alternative proposed by by the applicant. Do any of our members have questions that they'd like to ask at this time?
I have one.
I have one too as well.
Okay.
Me.
So David?
Okay. It's very simple. I'm looking at the facade drawings, not the nice rendering, just the black and white that were with the application, and I'm looking at the window areas colored yellow and blue, where the blue is transparent and the yellow is opaque. The normal kind of opaque glazing with the shelves behind it. The amount of fully transparent glazing looks very good on that orthographic projection. I mean, there are 3 or 4 fully transparent window bays on 36th Street. I don't know if anybody can. There we go. I'm looking at the top drawing there, and if I'm reading it right, the blue stuff is transparent according to the legend. And I found that very encouraging. I'm also wondering, but if you put that with the plan, where it sort of implies that, yes, the grocery store is going to put their shelving up against the wall like they always do. That seems to be at odds.
David, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is this in relation to the first request or the second request?
Oh, am I jumping the gun? Yeah.
I think you are, sir. Yeah,
Oh,
can you hold
dear.
your question?
They
Yeah,
kind of go
thank you.
together
Thank you,
though,
David.
right? I understand where you are, David. You almost have to talk about them in totality, but
It is really
We'll
difficult
come to that.
I mean, I understand why you got two applications because it's two sections of the code. So, yeah, I will shut up for the moment, but I'm sure you won't forget what I just said.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, David. And who is next with a question? I'm
Yes,
sorry.
question.
Okay.
I noticed that this location was within 1.5 miles away from the food line in the Plaza Midwood. I just want to confirm that that proximity, and also for the parking. I do have a concern. I know with underground parking, if you ever been to Whole Food, they force you to buy something in order to park, so you can get your stamp when you go out. Will this have the same type of structure in regards to the parking, or is there any other type of parking situation that they might have thought of besides the underground parking?
So on the parking, there'll be no gates or any restricted access at all. And the concept is that if you can flip to the plan, all ground level parking, some of the parking will be typical surface lot. There'll be a few spaces that'll be at grade outside the parking garage. And then the rest of the grocery parking will be the first floor of the structured parking. But the security gate will only be for the floors 2 and up. So it's
Okay.
be kind of self-policed on the parking.
All right. Thank you, Tarleton, for that explanation and response. Michael, if we could keep the questions specific to the request. So again, we're looking at the placement of the entrance, and the parking is not part of this request.
Mary, sorry.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I have a question. Christy or Mackenzie, I'm sorry. Can you zoom in on the plan? I just wanted to see if we could get some clarification on the two entrances, the one on Tryon and the one on 36th. It was a little unclear in both the plan and then in your comments a moment ago if these vestibules directly access the ground floor grocer and retail. Mackenzie, if you could zoom in a little further on the 36th Street entrance, perhaps. Sorry. It doesn't appear that that entrance goes into the grocery at all. Can you confirm that? And the same with the Tryon one as well.
That's correct. There'll be a lobby there, but it's for the residential use above. It's not for the grocery store. The grocery operators, basically they need to have one entry for obvious check-in, check-out, typical grocery arrival and exit. So those entries are to serve the apartments above the grocery store. But that one in particular will have a lobby space, an elevator, as well as stairs.
Okay. I guess I'm just a little, Eric sent a good link to the Harris Teeter and the Whole Foods as well. Both have dual entrances and I've worked with grocery retailers before and I 100% understand deviance from their prototypes is a hard battle to fight. But the spirit of the TOD and neighborhood engagement and development, and you speak so much about bringing food to a community and bringing a grocery store to a neighborhood that does need it. I just wonder, personally, I rely on a bike and transit, and there are grocery stores in town where having to cross through a parking lot or only enter through a parking garage is hazardous, not convenient. So just eliminating those two entrances to pedestrians and forcing them to move through this. And the urban plaza is a great idea, but it's not directly at grade. So if you're entering from coming down the sidewalk from Tryon, you have to go kind of all the way around the back of the plaza to get to grade to those grocery entrances, or you're met with, a stair, and then you still kind of have to go around. So I guess those are just a
Yeah,
little bit
so
of concerns.
to address that, as you point out, we think that the urban plaza that's our long view on hopefully the grocers understanding that maybe today they have to rely on people mostly arriving by car for their, models to work. But we view that as this neighborhood just becomes more and more urban, as the transit use picks up further, as the Cross Charlotte Trail comes through, that absolutely more and more people will arrive by bike and by foot. And this urban plaza, we kind of view it as another prominent entry off of 36th Street, bringing people into a safe pedestrian space, so you never have to cross a parking lot to get into the grocery store. And I think they're probably, at the end of the day, when we get into layouts with the grocery tenants, which is a long back and forth process, I think they would absolutely be open to potentially additional entries along that south facade facing the grocery store. But I think the 36th Street and the Tryon frontage are much more difficult propositions. But hopefully that public plaza, in a way, acts as another prominent entry along 36th Street for retail access.
Thanks. And I guess to that point too, I just had a question on the urban, on Tryon, the plaza and planter seating area that's proposed. I guess that would be more focused on residents then, or a landing place for folks coming across the property?
I think it's just a gesture to help try and activate Tryon a bit. So it could be people have just visited the grocery store and want to just eat a sandwich outside. It could be people walking down North Tryon. I think a lot of the urban focus will be more on 36th Street, just because Tryon is busy and a little bit less appealing as a walkable street. So the thought being is, let's provide a little bit of activation on Tryon Street to help draw people there, a moment to rest, or if someone's just passing by, somewhere to sit down.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Paige. Thank you, Tarleton. Any additional questions?
I had one, but don't want to go back over everything Paige just said, because I completely agree with all of the points she made. And also, the example of the Harris Teeter, they can do it. I think it's in the spirit of TOD, needs to have an entrance on those 36th Street or Tryon. And since neither of those actually enter the retail, the grocery store, something should be done. And going to the next question about the variance on the glazing, you could probably take one of those transparent glazings, since they probably won't have much in front of them. You could put an entrance.
Eric,
Combining both of those,
Eric.
that's just my point. Yep, I'm done.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so any other questions on the first item?
Last question. On the first item, you specifically talk about seating along the raised planters or seating options and raised planters, but in the drawing, it only shows seating at the entry coming from the station. Are the planters large enough for seating? Are you planning on putting them there? Where's the other seating we're talking about?
Kirsty, can you pan up to show? Yeah, so and we're showing in the rendering too, it's in that yellow zone along Tryon there. And we would have a canopy over that area for a little shade and protection. It's right there where her cursor is.
Now, that is only for the residents, correct? That entry is only for the residents? They can't enter the grocery store from that side, correct?
The entry, yes, is only for the residents. The seating would just be for public use.
Thank you.
Tarleton, we also are showing the seat wall along 36 that we're calling out, so there'd be landscaping and opportunities to sit on that transition there. I think that was part of some of where Eric was going in the discussion for the next part, but that's how that's been labeled.
All right. Okay, I have an additional question from Toby.
Yeah, you mentioned that added patio area is in addition to your required open space. Is any of the patio area at all counted as for open space?
No, we're in excess of open space requirements here.
Okay, so my question directly is your complete open space requirements mitigated elsewhere on the park property, or is this partially contributing to your open space requirements?
It's not even partially, it's completely mitigated elsewhere on the property. We have other public plazas with additional retail and leasing on the opposite side of the property, on the west side.
And that volume of space is in excess of the requirement. So I think we have a 10% requirement. We're close to 17% on that balance. And then this is in addition to that. And this is about 6,000 square feet of a plaza here.
Mackenzie, can you scroll over to the top left corner of that sheet they've got there? So some of that open space requirement is in private courtyard.
Any other comments or questions?
I had one additional one, and it does deal with entrances. If that cafe, it says possible, goes in, would there be an entrance there?
Yes.
Kind of in between.
So we have multiple tenants vying for this space, and some of them have like in-house cafe models and others don't. The ones that do would like to put theirs there and put a door there, and it's a big part of their business is the deli counter offering that they have. And then there are, of course,
so that would
public
be
seating outside as well.
Okay, so that would bring an entrance closer to 36th Street.
That's correct. Again, we're trying to give maximum flexibility to the tenants so that we have the greatest chance of checking all of their boxes and actually being willing to come to the site.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right. So now is the time for the ACRC. Oh, sorry. All right. Thank you. That closes out our public comment period and our questions. I'll invite recommendations from the ACRC. Once we have a motion and a second, I will hold a roll call vote. So do I have a motion? Can I have a motion to close out the public comment period and our period?
I move to close the discussion period.
Thank you.
So,
Paige, can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right. So I'll do a roll call vote. David Walters?
Aye.
Mary, sorry, if I could just jump in really quick. So we need somebody to make, we need somebody to make a motion, whether to approve it, to approve with modifications. And if someone wants to approve with modifications, and those modifications need to be laid out, or to recommend denial. And then we take the vote based on that motion.
All right. Sorry about that.
Yep.
I missed it.
And just to clarify to Mary, this is only on the first issue, correct?
This is only the first issue we are voting on. That is correct. So we're voting on the first issue. And so Do I have a recommendation for approval, approval with modification, or denial? So can I have a motion?
I have a motion with modification. And that modification is, to use one of those transparent glazings that either occurs on 36th Street or North Tryon to become an entrance to the grocery.
Second that motion.
This is Kirsty. So sorry, I'm trying to think on my feet here. So the request here is, the requirement is that 2 prominent entrances would be required. So the request here is that the request that they're bringing forth is to not provide the 2. If they were providing 2 entrances on 36th Street, then we wouldn't even be coming before you with this request. So again, we're looking at the request. So the request is to only provide 1 prominent entrance, and then to provide these other elements, the raised planter area. They're still providing the 1 prominent entrance in the urban plaza. So really here, we're not trying to add additional prominent entrances, because that's what the point of the request is, to not bring those 2 prominent entrances. So we really need to be looking at the application and the criteria that we use to evaluate these requests, and then go from there.
And
sorry about
if I could take 1 minute to, there's one key kind of site planning issue to point out here, which is because of the grade change, that 36th Street is quite a sloping street down Tryon, that the entry, other than on that south facade to the plaza or towards the parking where it's shown now, if there was one to the space closer up, because of that grade change, it would actually not be, you would have to have major stairs or ramping down, because the street level is so much higher up at that corner than it is down the opposite side, if that makes sense.
All right. Well, I guess I could then withdraw my motion for that, since they would require 2 on 36th Street, correct? But they're only providing 1.
1, right. That is correct.
You cannot require them to, with a modification, because then that would just be too foul. So I withdraw that, and
all right. So if we've had so Eric has withdrawn his proposal.
motion.
So, his motion. Thank you. So now, do we have a motion for approval or denial?
So, and looking at this,
Or modification?
Sure. I wanted to just kind of say, I'll make a motion to approve. Obviously, the corner at Tryon and 36th Street, it's a difficult corner. There is, I wouldn't say that there is a raging need in Nodal per se for a grocery store, but there is one closer to Druid Hills and Tryon Hills. In the spirit of the ordinance, the pedestrian access to the building is generally, from the Nodal side. It is one of the more walkable neighborhoods in Charlotte. And there is a nod to that with the plaza space that's located on the 36th Street side of that approach. So, where there may not be 2 entrances or 2 prominent entrances, there is some architectural detail, there's some transparency, and there is an effort to make that make the spirit of the ordinance work. So I move for approval of the first request.
I second.
Thank you. All right. So I will hold a roll call vote to capture everyone's recommendation. So, David, back to you, sir. Do you approve or deny?
Approve.
Paige? Eric?
Deny.
Toby? Wait, Eric, you're denying?
I also said deny. I'm not sure if I was unmuted.
Okay, thank you. All right. David, were you approve or denying? I just want to make sure I caught it.
I
David Wilson?
approve. I approve
Okay, thank you,
the
sir.
motion. As did that
Okay,
motion need
thank
a
you.
second? Hello?
I thought we had a second. I'm sorry.
I will
I get-
second it if
I
there's.
think somebody.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. We did. Yes. So I voted
Thank
to
you.
approve that motion.
Okay, thank you. Paige, deny. Eric, you're a deny. Toby?
Approved.
Toby? Okay. Let's see. Renee? Is Renee on? All right, then Michael Paul James?
Approve.
And then Michael Bridges? Michael Bridges? Michael,
I don't
you may
think
be
he's in
on
attendance.
mute. Oh, I thought he was on. Did he drop off? Okay.
He may.
All
he may
right.
have.
Okay, thank you. And then, all right, so, and Kirsty, I get to vote, correct?
You do.
And then I approve. So I will count them, and then Kirsty, if you'll follow up. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 approves and 2 denies. Kirsty, is that what you captured?
It is.
All right. Just double checking myself. All right. All right. So thank you. Thank you. With the vote of 4-2, the ACRC recommendation on this request is approval. So thank you all. So at this time, we're going to move on to our second request. Our second request is ACRC 2021-00002. This is a request for alternative compliance from section 15.2.1.e.e, the ground floor transparency area. I'll invite staff to present the application and staff recommendation on this request. You have 5 minutes to do so. Kirsty?
Great, thank you. If we could go to the next slide. So again, this is the same site that we're looking at, 3100 North Tryon Street. And this is a request for alternative compliance for our ground floor transparency area. So North Tryon Street is classified as a 4+ lane avenue and requires a minimum 40% ground floor transparency. And 36th Street is classified as an other primary frontage and requires a minimum 60% ground floor transparency. So if we could go to the next slide. So as an alternative to providing the required ground floor transparency, the applicant is proposing to treat the North Tryon frontage by providing a minimum 20% transparency, providing displays and artwork in the opaque storefront windows, and providing activated pedestrian space, which includes seating, planters, and architectural enhancements along a minimum 20% of the building facade. And then along the 36th Street frontage, they're proposing a minimum 30% transparency, providing the displays and artwork in the opaque storefront windows, providing that public plaza on the south side of the grocery store, and then providing that activated pedestrian space along the building's facade that includes the seating options, raised planters, and architectural details. Here we have the site plan. Again, this is the same site plan we just looked at. Just one thing I wanted to point out is for the facade on the North Tryon Street frontage, you'll see that there's an area highlighted in like a yellow, lime green kind of color. And that's where the applicant is proposing to provide some activated pedestrian space that has seating and planters. So just wanted to point that out. And then if we could move to the next slide. So here we have our building elevations. The top elevation is for 36th Street. Again, the TOD would typically require a minimum 60% ground floor transparency, and the applicant is proposing a minimum 30% transparency, which you can see in the windows that they have colored in blue. And then for the North Tryon Street elevation, TOD requires a minimum 40% transparency, and they are proposing a minimum 20% transparency. So again, those transparent windows are shown in the blue here. So if you could go to the next slide. So again, here's the building elevation from the corner of North Tryon and 36th Street. And if we go to the next one, and then again, same image with the call out. So again, they're proposing the storefront with some transparency and some opaque windows with displays and artwork. You know, the green roof with the canopy, the raised planters, a brick soldier course, metal canopy, and outdoor seating. So if you can go to the next one. So here we have the criteria that we use to evaluate requests for alternative compliance when it comes to dimensional standards. These are the same criteria that we just used on the previous request. So we are asking, does the site maintain compatibility with adjacent development and surrounding area? Does it maintain pedestrian safety and walkability? And does the design maintain an engaging pedestrian environment on the ground floor? So after reviewing the request and the criteria for alternative compliance, we feel that the proposal does meet the criteria and the intent of the TOD district, and we recommend approval of the request. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Kirsty. All right, so at this time, I'd like to next I'll invite the applicant to present any additional information on the request. You have up to 5 minutes to do so.
So this is in the same spirit as the other request, the end goal being providing a site plan and a space that a grocery tenant would be willing to come to. And that includes this transparency request so that we can have flexibility with their interior layout, with the understanding that we still do want to provide points of transparency for street side activation. So we're recommending to maintain some degree of transparency, but just have the additional flexibility so that when they come and do their layouts, we can still make it work for how their store prototypes work.
All right, any other comments? All right. Okay, so at this time, I'd like, Kirsty, do we have any public comments either for or against? Kirsty.
We don't.
We don't. Okay. All right. So then what we will do, we will, thank you. So then we'll close out our public comment period. Let the record indicate that we had no speakers for and no speakers objecting to the request. So thank you. Now is the time for the ACRC to ask staff or the applicant any follow-up questions on this request. Again, I'd like to ask for the discussion to be kept relevant to the design standards related to this request and the alternative proposed by the applicant. Do any of our members have questions they'd like to ask?
I do.
David? Okay, well, thank you.
I'll keep this very brief. I mean, I've been involved on both sides of this condition, and I totally get the difficulty of working with major tenants who have their own sort of layouts. And I think that this proposal is a sort of very brave one in as much as it does attempt, I guess, attempt to push back on the standard, back everything up to the wall model that stores have. And again, when I veered off the course in the first one, talking about the blue areas on the elevations, I'm just wondering what guarantees there could ever be that the store layouts would adhere to those. Because clearly there will be great pressure from the store layout to block those off. Those with long memories might remember the saga of the CVS pharmacy in Davidson many years ago, which did exactly that. It the design was approved, the transparency was there, CVS went in and blanked all the windows. In response to that, the town board withheld a certificate of occupancy until the ordinance was actually followed, and CVS backed down because of the particulars of that market. That condition doesn't apply here, I'm fairly sure. So when there is pushback from the tenant to use all the wall space for vegetables or whatever, what guarantee do we have that the community transparency requirements are going to be upheld?
If you don't mind me piggybacking on that, that was a question that I wanted clarification on. Where you note opaque glazing, is the intent to use an opaque panel, like a spandrel panel, or is the intent to kind of say that with films or vinyl coverings that will not exceed a certain opacity?
No, so the intent of the yellow areas would be, it's still glazing, but a spandrel panel. And then there might be artwork or something, so it's not just kind of like that gray, opaque look, but it's a little bit more active than that. In the rendering, we're showing paintings of fruit and vegetables. Maybe it's something like that, maybe it's something else. But then with the transparent portion, you're absolutely right. This is a risk we're taking that they're really not going to like this. And while we're suggesting these specific bays that have transparent glazing, I think what we're ultimately suggesting is that, it's 20% and every 40 feet. It's a set of rules we can follow, because we don't know if that particular bay really needs to be the milk stand or not. But we can say, we've got to intermittently provide transparent zones along the facade according to these set of rules. And the set of rules we're proposing is, the 20% along Tryon and the 30% along 36th Street.
So the blue bits might move according to negotiations with the layout.
Right, and what we're saying here is they might move left or right, but as long as we provide them to that percentage and at a maximum distance of 40 feet between two transparent zones. So that way you don't have a long stretch of facade without visibility into the space.
Understood. Thank you.
Hi, this is Kirsty. Sorry, I lost the audio connection on my computer, so I had to call in. So I know I missed part of the audio, but I think the question being asked here is whether or not the transparent areas that are shown here could eventually be covered up. And in order to meet our zoning code, they would need to maintain the minimum transparency that they're committing to with this application.
Thank you, Kirsty. Any additional questions?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. One of which is, what is the mitigation, I guess, kind of where's the trade-off here? If you're reducing the transparency by half on both facades, then how are you making up for that in the spirit of the ordinance?
So on the mitigation front, we viewed these two things kind of collectively, both the variance request. So, if the intent of transparency is activation of urban street fronts, our mitigation for both the entry and the reduced transparency is providing the urban plaza, which we wouldn't have to provide otherwise, to encourage pedestrian and bicycle arrival, as well as just public pedestrian use. Providing the raised planter and outdoor seating areas along 36th and Tryon. So kind of those mitigating design elements were viewed as kind of collectively addressing both transparency and entry with the purpose of alternative means of activating an urban street front.
Okay, so my follow-up question to that is, and I appreciate the answer. This is the 36th Street elevation, fair enough, and I think this is beyond the point of the kind of the pedestrian entryway that'd be located on the east side of the store. As a person who's walked between this Lightville station and Nodai Brewing more than a few times, North Tryon Street is a fairly inactive corridor for pedestrians. In fact, no one wants to walk there that I know of. So I understand the trade-off here. However, on that eastern kind of patio area, do you have any? Can you tell us what the glazing is like there, or the transparency of those windows, since it is kind of the mitigating pedestrian approach?
You mean facing the south facade? So that would be 100% transparent or close to it. Because it's not a street frontage, there's no compliance issue there, so we didn't present it. But the intent is that's the quote active facade for the grocery store that is almost entirely transparent.
I'd like to ask this question of staff. Is there a way to memorialize that? And if only if of course, the applicant is comfortable with memorializing it and how we would memorialize it, but is it possible to do that?
To memorialize that the internal entry is transparent?
That those windows that face the urban plaza are transparent and contributes to kind of the overall transparency of the ground floor.
I might need to phone a friend and get Shad to weigh in on that. Again, the requests here are for transparency along 36th Street and North Tryon. So I really think that those are the frontages that we're looking at here. So I think that if there are any proposed modifications, that those would need to be for those facades. But I don't know if Shad or Laura, if one of you might have anything to add, or if you think I'm off base with that, feel free to let us know.
Okay, this is Shad. I just did text to Kirsty, but I guess she didn't get it. If the board decides to recommend approval, I mean, I guess it could be something that could be a condition of that approval, since it does tie into the transparency requirements, even though it's not technically required on the interior portion of the site, but the board could have that as a condition of approval.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Shad. And I understand it's not required and not necessarily the part of the request, but is very much part of the mitigation if we can go that direction. And I don't know, I wouldn't want to kind of put words in our applicant's mouth with regard to commitments on that facade, but I think we have, by way of the last decision, agreed that is probably the more active facade. And would make a lot of sense to have that additional or commitment to transparency to that location. I don't know if the applicant can respond to what they may be comfortable with, or how to kind of make part of the mitigation for it.
I mean, I think if that's a condition for approving the proposed transparency on 36 and Tryon, I think we're certainly open to it. It is a little funny in that it's not a frontage, right? It's, I guess, an interior property line condition. But our intent was always to create that facade being the main kind of transparent front door to the grocery store. And it actually has a lot of prominence as well, because again, of the slope of the site, it's the largest facade. It's nearly 30 feet tall, actually, at the low end. So it'll have a lot of prominence as well.
I want to make explicit what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say, in compensation for lowering the transparency, we're going to throw a requirement that it can't be internally blocked. Is that what we're talking about?
No, I think, Toby, correct me if I'm wrong, you're suggesting where it says possible cafe area, see that facade there? Which we're not asking, because that's not a frontage of any kind. I think Toby is suggesting that we commit to providing a certain level of transparency on that facade in exchange for accepting our proposed transparency on 36th and Triumph.
That's how I understood it. Toby?
So Toby, you're suggesting not having the transparency? Is that what I heard?
No. No, what I'm suggesting is that if we are talking about a reduction in transparency on 2 required facades, and the mitigation for essentially the urban plaza space that is the possible cafe area, I think that if there, and it's not by any means a quid pro quo if that's not part of the mitigating efforts, and we can't necessarily force our hand on it. But if it can contribute to the mitigating efforts, then I would propose that we take that into consideration.
What that would mean then, just thinking ahead for a moment, is that if we had a motion to approve with conditions, which is one of the things we can do, right? Right. So that could be a condition.
So
we could approve with conditions.
Yeah. So this is Mary. So what I was going to reiterate back to everyone is that we have three motions. We can approve with modifications, or we can deny. So I think what I heard Toby say is he'd like to approve with modifications, and the modification would be to provide transparent windows on the cafe area.
Yeah, I would say that if you want to put it in the form of a motion, that would make a motion to approve on the condition that the possible cafe area / urban plaza has transparency meeting or exceeding 70%.
I would second that.
All right. Okay. So
there's one little gray area there, is that because of the property line location, you may know that property lines there's like a tier of glazing that's you can provide within X distance of a property line. So we need to make sure we don't violate that rule. And I believe we're at either the 45% threshold here. So we're happy to provide the transparency up to the rule that governs glazing adjacent a property line. Do you know what I'm referring to, actually?
Yeah. So is that acceptable, Toby? Do you want to amend your modification? Toby?
Oh, no, I didn't hear you.
Okay, I'm going to go back. Okay. So I'd like to go back and ask.
Continue conversation. I was under the impression that would have a much more significant amount of transparency on that facade.
I mean, I guess if you were to require more than the rules governed by distance from property line, then I guess we would have to have something, because I guess we'd be breaking one rule to follow your rule, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
the design intent of that facade the design intent is, large storefront windows with piers of brick. And just the rhythm of the grid. So if you took our grid on 36th Street, like if you jump over to the 36th Street elevation, the actual elevation, I think. So if you took that proportion, let's just pretend all the yellow and blue is transparent. You would probably only be at, once you include the water table, the pier, the spandrel above, you'd probably be at max 50% there, maybe even 40%. So again, our design intent is exactly this design, but all transparent. And I think the reality is that 70% would mean a lot of glass, a lot less brick, and it would deviate from the kind of rigorous, we think is a nice kind of combination of masonry and glazing. But again, our design intent is basically to propose this same facade design, but all transparent.
Sure, and I think that's a great clarification, and I think that that's a great clarification, and that is transparency versus opacity, I guess. So, and what I don't want to happen is that urban plaza space to have the required windows and transparency, but are all basically opaque. Right, with the film over the windows so that you can see in or out. I think that active facade, that is where the opacity situation occurs. So for your requirement with regard to transparency at that location by way of ordinance, to me is perfectly acceptable. We can't make a rule that exceeds the rule or less than the rule on the books. My intent is to make sure those windows are not made opaque.
Got it.
Okay.
So in the motion, say, yes, ma'am.
Would you amend your motion, please?
Yes, ma'am. In the motion to approve with the approved under the circumstances that the transparency on the windows facing the urban plaza are not made opaque by more than 30%, in the event to give you some flexibility there.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All right. So may I have so it's moved by, so we have the motion by, so it's with modification by Toby, David. All right, so I'd like to hold a roll call vote to capture everyone's recommendations. David?
Approve.
All right, Paige?
Approve with modifications.
I should have said that. Approve with modifications.
Okay, thank you, David. Eric?
Approved with modifications.
Thank you. Toby?
Approve modifications.
Okay. Michael Paul James?
Approve with modifications.
Okay. I approve with modifications. And did I miss anyone? All right, so I have, thank you, I have a vote of 6 to 0. The ACRC recommendation on this request is approved with modifications. That closes our meeting for today. As I previously mentioned, written comments on this request will be accepted until 11:59 p.m. on April 2nd. These comments should be sent to our staff liaison, Kirsty Santos at charlottenc.gov. Comments should be limited to 375 words. Staff will forward any written comments along with the ACRC and staff recommendations to the Planning, Design, and Development Director. The director will make the final decision on this request. Any questions or comments before I close out the meeting? All right, thank you all for joining. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Get your
Thank you,
cup
everyone.
shot.
Thank you.
Time.
Good to see everybody.
Bye.
Bye, David.
Good to see everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Toby.
Bye. Bye. Bye.